name is Linda Sokolowski. I'm here to interview Mr. Robert Berger, and this is for the Veterans History Project in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress. Bob, would you like to start and give us the information from when you began your service?
Thank you, Linda. My name is Bob Berger. I'm a former Marine, United States Marine, member of the 4th Marine Division during World War II. I enlisted back in the early days of the war in 1942. Tried to enlist shortly after Pearl Harbor, but I couldn't get either one of my parents to sign the release, so I was stuck going to college for a while. I was a freshman at City College of New York when, with the help of one of my dad's friends, I persuaded him to sign the release that would allow me to go into the Corps. So I enlisted from New York City, which is where I was living at the time. They swore me in, put me on a train, the old Atlantic coastline, from Penn Station in New York down to Washington, Union Station, and from there we went down to what they call Yamasee, which is just outside of Parris Island, and became a Marine recruit. Spent about three months, the equivalent of about 12 weeks, in Parris Island recruit training, which was one of the most interesting things I've ever experienced. One that I'm not sure I would like to ever go through again, but one that I never regret having gone through. You understand, I was just a youngster from the streets of New York, and this was fantastic training, the ability to learn how to control oneself and how to do things that one never thought they were able to do. After 3 months in Parris Island, I was fortunate enough to be passed on to a place called Hadnot Point outside of Jacksonville, North Carolina. And that's a training place where they set up the communication school, and went to school there for about a month, learned how to be a radio operator, how to be a telephone man, how to string wire, how to climb poles. One of the interesting things, I have a picture of myself up a pole. All of my children who are deathly afraid of heights can't believe that their father is 50 feet up a pole stringing wire. But went through that and enjoyed that very much, especially since that's a time when the women Marines started, and they were placed in barracks around the corner from our barracks. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to meet any of them. They were off limits. Went through communication school and then went on to Tent City in New River, North Carolina, to form the, well, actually the 3rd Division was in existence at that time, and they brought some of us in to be part of the 3rd Division. And 3rd Division shipped out, and they took those of us who were brand new and put us into the cadre to form the 4th Marine Division. Since I had experience in communications school, they put me in as a what you call a forward observer, and that is somebody who lands with the infantry and calls back information so that the artillery can send fire down on the enemy lines. Spent some time in North Carolina. Interesting. Discovered the existence of every single girls' college in the state of North Carolina within hitchhiking distance of Jacksonville, North Carolina. Had some interesting long trips to Washington, D.C. that were not warranted, but we used to sneak in just before roll call in time to keep from getting set up on a captain's mask or a court-martial. After training at North Carolina and getting all the training we could there, they shipped us out to a place called Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California. Partway between Los Angeles and San Diego. Or as we used to say out there, we were halfway between Dago and L.A. Two terms which my wife, who lived in California, hates to see anybody use. Both great liberty towns. L.A. a little bit more than San Diego because San Diego was more a Navy town than a Marine Corps town. And we spent some considerable time doing a lot of maneuvering and training, and as an incidental, we also were pushed into service to do some forest fire fighting or brush fire fighting. You see some of that's being done today. Well, back in those days, they didn't have the forces they have today to do what's being done, so they would take the Marines and put them in there. Had an opportunity to do some horseback riding on the beaches. Always used to amaze people to find that this kid from New York City could ride a horse. You couldn't imagine how a city kid could ever know which side to get up on, never mind how to ride them. But they didn't realize that we had an academy, a horse place in Central Park, where when I was a kid I used to do some errands for them in return for some riding lessons. So it gave me an opportunity out in California to spend some time riding on the beaches and enjoying some real liberty. Finished up in Oceanside, and we shipped out. We were the first American military unit to go directly into combat from the United States. That's one of the things that the 4th Marine Division is noted for. We had no advanced base. We left San Diego in, I guess it was 1944, early 1944, and went directly to a little place in the Marshall Islands called Roy Namur, Kwajalein Atoll. Again, my job was to set up a communications section so that we could persuade or let the artillery know where to lay down their fire. But for Roy Namur, which was a very, very small island, it was a little difficult to call down artillery fire. So we became part of the infantry. Usually landed first or second wave. Spent about a day and a half, 2 days, and we managed to secure the island. It was an interesting opportunity to observe the enemy and how they fought, because on this island they fought in 2 different ways. Number one, they would strap themselves into palm trees and use that as height leverage to fire down on us, or they would hide in little culverts underneath airstrips so that you couldn't see them. But we went through that fine. We had a little breeze on Roy. Namur had a little bit more problems. Somehow a blockhouse broke up blew up in Namur, and a substantial number of Marines were seriously injured. One of them, Patsy Renner from this town, who was very badly injured, was sent back to hospital, from which he fortunately recovered, but never got back into combat. My interesting experience on Roy Namur was we were just about to reach the end of the island, and we ran across a little, looked like a ditch or a rampart or something, and the skipper said, anybody got a grenade, throw a grenade into the ditch up there. So I had a grenade and I pulled it, and he said, we're all going to charge the minute the grenade goes. So I threw the grenade and I missed. It didn't hit the ditch, and we all charged up And the skipper looked in the hole and he said, "Thank God you missed, because it's an ammunition dump. We'd have probably blown to hell." So I was fortunate to get out of Roy Namur alive. Came back, and then we had some good duty. We got back to Hawaii, one of my favorite places, a little place called Maui, Maui no Ko'aui, which in Hawaiian means Maui is the best. Beautiful, beautiful island. The only problem with Maui was that all the natives on Hawaii would not let any of their daughters date any of the Marines stationed on the island of Maui. So female companionship was not a possibility on the island of Maui. We trained on Maui, got a lot of other experiences, learned some things, had some good times and some bad times. Had an opportunity to climb to the top of Mount Haleakala, which is the extinct volcano on Maui. Fantastic view at sunshine. The interesting thing is I went back to Maui many, many years later. I had a conference in Maui and stayed at a beautiful hotel which didn't exist back in the 40s. And just when my wife and I got there, and I got up the first morning, I took a shower. And I must have been in the shower for half an hour. And she's banging on the door, and she said, "Well, you have to get to a meeting." And I said, "I know, but this is the first hot water I've ever had on the island of Maui, because all we had was cold water showers from water coming down from the mountains." We've established there at Maui, the 4th Marine Division has established a great little memorial park, which we've paid for, and if you're ever out in Maui, it's worth visiting. When I was there, they had a little child's birthday party going on in the pavilion that I visited, and there were some other women there who invited us to join them for lunch when they found out where we were from. But it's a great island, a great place, and I really enjoyed my time there. Along in 44, they came along and said, "You have another operation you have to do." And they sent us out to the Marianas. Interesting set of islands. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The 3rd Division was responsible for Guam. The 4th Division was responsible for Saipan, and then Tinian. Again, landed in the first wave. When you're a forward observer and you're with the infantry, the first couple of days, the infantry doesn't get the infantry gets established, but the artillery doesn't. So we fight as regular infantry people during that period of time. We had some interesting experiences. We had part jungle fighting and part city fighting, or little town fighting, because they had a couple of towns, Charon Kanoa and a few others in Saipan. One of my most interesting experiences there is we didn't get what I would call fresh food. We lived on K rations or C rations, which were a tremendous change from the Ks, but still nothing to be sneezed at. We were on Saipan, and during one of the lulls in the fighting, my buddy Ray Miracle and I noticed a chicken running around in between the front lines. So that's fresh meat. So Ray and I, Ray and I went and we caught the damn chicken and killed it and put it in some hot water in our Iron Kellys, our helmets, and stripped the damn thing and cooked it. We had some chicken soup, and we had, for the first time, some fresh chicken meat. Of course, one of our sergeants kept telling us that we were going to die because the chicken had probably been picking at all the dead Japs while he was running around. But just didn't give up a chance for fresh meat. Had some interesting experiences on Saipan. Shot at people. But one of the most devastating things that I have ever seen in my life was what happened towards the end of the island. For some reason, the Japanese had convinced all the people who lived on the island that the Marines were terrible, terrible people. So rather than give in or succumb or become prisoners, they jumped off the cliff at the end of the island. And not only jumped off themselves, but threw their children off. We had people trying to talk to them in their native language and doing everything possible to convince them that they really should give up, and they didn't. And it was really heartbreaking to see so many people for no reason whatsoever dying. We managed to come through Little Saipan, and then we moved across the strait to Tinian, which was another island. The reason for taking Saipan to Tinian is they needed some place to base the bombers that they were going to use to bomb Japan. And those were the two islands that were the most positive ones for them to use. You might know, if you've studied history at all, that the Enola Gay that dropped the first bomb in Hiroshima flew from Tinian. That's where it took off from. While we were on Saipan, we had, we had some interesting experiences, but got through that all right. Lost a few people, had a number wounded, but came back to Maui and recuperated and got ourselves back together, and then he told us we were heading out for another operation. A place in the Pacific pretty close to Japan called the Bonans. The island was known as Iwo Jima, and they indicated this was one we had to take because it was the only place where wounded planes could land on the way back from bombing missions to Japan, and the only place where, right at that time, the Japanese had fighter planes that would enable them to knock down or strafe the American planes. We landed on Iwo, February 1945. It was a very difficult operation, one of the most difficult I've ever been in. If you ever go to the movies and see the movie known as The Sands of Iwo Jima, do not believe a thing that you see in that. It's the most terrible movie I've ever seen in my life. It doesn't really have any bearing on what actually happened. But it was the, if you can visualize volcanic ash, extremely deep, black, that formed the beachhead. And for every 2 steps that you took up the ash, you'd slip back 1. And our beach was located between Mount Suribachi, which was the high point on our left flank, and the little hills on our right flank. So that the Japanese had mortars, anti-tank guns, anti-personnel guns, that they could just zero in and do whatever they wanted to until we could knock them out. There were 3 airports on the island. We had to take all 3 of them. We managed to, we didn't meet our timetable. It was a little difficult, but we did secure the first airport. That's the one my good friend Billy Richardson from up in Dexter, Maine, was one of our radio men, and we're crossing the airport and running like hell to keep from getting shot, and all of a sudden Billy goes down, takes an overhead hit, and we're yelling and yelling and yelling, and Billy doesn't respond, so we go back to him, and he's okay. And I say, Billy, why didn't you answer us? And he said, I thought I was dead. I couldn't answer. His radio was absolutely devastated, so we had to send somebody back to get it replaced. And then we went back up. It took us a few more days, and we finally reached the main hill that was creating all the problems. And we took that, went on to finish the fight and take the island. was wounded on Iwo. Not seriously enough to have to be evacuated, at least I didn't think so, so I stayed. I received a shoulder wound and some facial wounds, which are not readily visible. But I did lose 3 of my very best friends, my tent mates on that island. We lived together in the same tent for probably 2.5 years, and all 3 of them died at one of those days of battle. We got through Iwo and came back to Maui for a little rest and respite, knowing that we had one more operation that we were going to have to take, and all of us knew exactly what that was. There were only 3 of us left from our forward observer group that had started out back in 42, 43. There were only 3 of us left: Beans Holly, John Holly, myself, and George. And the skipper had called us in and said, you know, you've been through 4, got 1 more, you're willing to do it? And the 3 of us looked and said, Skipper, you want us to go, we'll go, but don't ask us to volunteer. 4 is tough enough. So he said, okay, you're my guys, so you're going to do it. So we started training for what we knew was going to be the invasion of Japan. The happiest day of my life was in August of 1945. I was on guard duty when the word came down that the war was over. The bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. Years later, I look back and feel awful sorry for all those innocent people who died, who didn't start this thing and suffered as a result. But every time I go to Kansas City, I visit Harry Truman's Presidential Library, and I sign the book, and I sign it, Bob Berger, U.S. Marine Corps, 4th Marine Division. Thank you very much, because I probably wouldn't be alive if he hadn't dropped that damn bomb. That's basically my story. I left a lot of things out.
Bob, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Did you receive any special medals or special awards or anything while you were in?
Well, I got the Marine Corps Commendation Medal and the Purple Heart.
Okay.
Got Presidential Unit Citation, Navy Unit Citation, a couple of Battle Stars. I never got a Good Conduct Medal. Never did understand that, but...
Bob, are you still working now, or are you retired?
No, I'm still working.
Okay.
Only part-time, only 40 hours a week now.
And what do you do, Bob?
I'm a practicing attorney.
Very good. So I think that's about it, and I just would like to thank you, and thank you for America.